September 14, 1847. Charleston, South Carolina. A woman walks down the aisle of St. Michael's Episcopal Church wearing a silk gown worth more than most men earn in a lifetime. Her face conceals behind imported French lace. The congregation watches in reverence as she approaches one of the wealthiest plantation heirs in the American South. But the woman beneath the veil is not Lady Catherine Ashford, the European aristocrat promised to this union. She is Amara, a 23-year-old enslaved woman who, in less than 12 hours, will become the legal wife of William Thornwood III, and the rightful heir to the largest plantation empire between Virginia and Louisiana. What you're about to witness changed American property law forever and exposed the most dangerous secret in antebellum society. Make sure you're subscribed because the truth that emerges will challenge everything you thought you knew about this era. The year 1847 stands at a crossroads in American history. While American forces push deeper into Mexico City, claiming territories that will reshape the nation's borders, another war wages silently within the plantation houses of the South. A war of inheritance, legitimacy, and power that no battlefield could ever settle. The Thornwood plantation spans 14,000 acres across the Carolina Lowcountry. Rice fields stretch to horizons interrupted only by moss-draped oaks and the distant shimmer of coastal marshland. 347 enslaved people work this land, their labor generating wealth that rivals European nobility. William Thornwood III inherited this empire 6 months earlier when yellow fever claimed his father during an unusually brutal summer. At 28, he finds himself master of not only Thornwood Hall but also controlling interests in 2 Charleston banks, a textile mill, and shipping contracts that extend to Liverpool and Amsterdam. But there exists a problem that threatens everything. His father's will contains an unusual provision, drafted during a period of paranoia about Northern abolitionists and changing property laws. The inheritance remains conditional. William must marry and produce an heir within 18 months, or the entire estate transfers to his cousin, Marcus Thornwood, a Mississippi cotton magnate with political ambitions and dangerous connections to the growing secession movement. Lady Catherine Ashford arrived from England 4 months ago, a distant relative of minor nobility seeking fortune in America. The arrangement suited both parties. She needed wealth, he needed legitimacy and an heir to secure his inheritance. Their engagement announcement appeared in every major newspaper from Richmond to New Orleans. What those newspapers never reported was Lady Catherine's death 3 weeks before the wedding. Cholera swept through Charleston that August, claiming 73 lives in 11 days. Lady Catherine succumbed in a boarding house on Meeting Street, far from the grand society that had welcomed her arrival. William Thornwood faced impossible mathematics. The will's deadline approached. Postponing the wedding would invite questions, investigations, and eventually the loss of everything his family had built over 3 generations. Canceling meant certain financial ruin and the elevation of a cousin whose vision for the South involved expansion, political radicalization, and an acceleration toward the conflict that already simmered beneath the surface of national politics. In desperation, he turned to the one person who knew Lady Catherine's mannerisms, her speech patterns, and her secrets. Amara had served as Lady Catherine's personal attendant from the moment the Englishwoman arrived in Charleston. For 4 months, she dressed her, accompanied her, learned her inflections and gestures. She knew how Lady Catherine took her tea, the way she held her parasol, the particular rhythm of her walk. The plan formed in whispered conversations in the plantation's north wing, far from the ears of overseers and house staff. William proposed something that violated every law, custom, and social boundary of the antebellum South. Amara would become Lady Catherine. She would stand at that altar, speak those vows, and consummate a marriage that would secure the Thornwood inheritance. For Amara, the proposition offered something more valuable than freedom. It offered power over her own fate and potentially the fate of every enslaved person on Thornwood land. She agreed, understanding the magnitude of what lay ahead, knowing that discovery meant death, but calculating that the risk might be worth the unprecedented opportunity. The preparations consumed 3 weeks. Amara studied every detail of Lady Catherine's documented life, her supposed childhood in Somerset, her education at a ladies' academy, her late father's minor position in the British diplomatic service. She practiced the accent until it became natural, memorized genealogies and social connections, transformed herself into a woman she had only served. Now, as she walks down that aisle, every step represents a gamble against detection, against the social order that defines every aspect of American Southern life, against the legal structures that consider her property rather than person. The ceremony proceeds according to tradition. The Reverend speaks of duty, of partnership, of the sanctity of marriage before God and society. William's hand trembles slightly as he lifts the veil, seeing Amara's face where society expects Lady Catherine's. No one else notices. The transformation is complete. The reception at Thornwood Hall displays wealth accumulated over 3 generations of rice cultivation and shrewd financial management. Crystal chandeliers imported from France illuminate rooms where Charleston's elite gather to celebrate what they believe represents the union of American prosperity and European refinement. Amara moves through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting congratulations, making appropriate small talk, maintaining the careful facade that separates survival from catastrophe. Every gesture must be perfect, every word precisely calibrated. She sips champagne she has never tasted before, engages in conversations about European social seasons she has only heard described, performs the role with an accuracy born of desperate necessity. William watches from across the room, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betray the anxiety beneath the performance. They have rehearsed this moment, planned every contingency, but the reality of their deception unfolds in real time before witnesses whose suspicions would mean destruction. By midnight, the guests depart with promises to visit soon, to welcome the new Mrs. Thornwood into Charleston society, to attend the dinner parties and social events that will cement her position. The great house settles into silence broken only by the distant sounds of enslaved workers cleaning the reception rooms and the perpetual chorus of insects from the surrounding lowcountry. The wedding night tradition demands consummation. Property law of 1847 requires evidence of marital completion for inheritance purposes. The marriage must be real in every legal sense, despite the fundamental fraud at its foundation. Amara enters the master bedroom aware that what happens next will determine not only the success of their deception, but also the complex reality of her new existence. She is simultaneously William's legal wife under civil law and his property under slave codes. The contradiction defines the impossibility of their situation. William stands by the window overlooking the plantation grounds. From this vantage point, the neat rows of slave quarters are visible in the moonlight, small structures housing the people whose labor generates everything he controls. The conversation that follows establishes the terms of their arrangement. William explains his intention to honor the marriage as genuine, to treat her as a wife rather than property, to share power in ways that no law or custom would ever sanction. He speaks of plans to gradually manumit enslaved people, to restructure the plantation's operations, to use his position to influence the political debates that will soon tear the nation apart. Amara listens with the caution of someone who has learned not to trust words unsupported by action. She has spent her entire life watching white men make promises to black women, promises that evaporate with morning light. Yet she also recognizes that her current position offers leverage no enslaved person has ever possessed. She is both wife and property, both partner and captive, both ally and potential threat. The consummation occurs not as an act of passion but as a contractual necessity, a legal requirement that cements the fraud they have perpetrated. In the morning, the sheets will display the evidence that society demands, proof that the marriage stands valid under the laws governing property, inheritance, and legitimacy. But something unexpected happens in the darkness of that bedroom. A conversation extends beyond negotiation into genuine connection. Amara speaks of her childhood, of being sold at age 7 from a Virginia plantation to a Charleston slave trader, of learning to read in secret despite laws that prohibited enslaved literacy, of watching her mother die from infections that white physicians refused to treat. William listens with an attention that surprises them both. He speaks of his own father's cruelty, of growing up watching violence normalized, of developing a disgust for the system that enriched his family while destroying others. He describes his time at Harvard, where Northern intellectuals challenged his assumptions, where he encountered abolitionist literature that revealed the moral bankruptcy of everything his inheritance represented. Neither completely trusts the other, but they recognize a potential alliance forged from mutual necessity and, perhaps, the beginning of something neither expected, a partnership that might transcend the categories their society imposes. As dawn approaches, they hear the plantation bell summoning enslaved workers to the fields. The sound represents the reality that no amount of personal connection can erase. They exist within a system that defines human beings as property, that considers marriage between races not only illegal but unthinkable, that would respond to discovery with violence swift and total. Amara rises and dresses, preparing for her first full day as Lady Catherine Thornwood. She examines her reflection in the mirror, seeing the silk nightgown that marks her supposed status while remembering the rough cotton she wore every day of her previous existence. The contradiction defines her new reality. She possesses unprecedented power while remaining utterly vulnerable to exposure. William makes a decision that will shape everything that follows. He takes the original slave documentation listing Amara as plantation property and burns it in the bedroom fireplace. The act holds no legal significance. Dozens of copies exist in Charleston's commercial registries, but it represents a symbolic gesture, a declaration of intention that cannot be retracted. The next 6 months will test whether their deception can survive the scrutiny of Charleston society. The truth about what happens will shock you, so stay with this account as we document how one act of fraud exposed the fragility of America's entire social structure. October transitions to November as Amara establishes herself within Charleston's elite social circles. She attends tea parties at the homes of plantation mistresses, participates in charity events for the Presbyterian Church, hosts dinners where men discuss cotton prices and political tensions while their wives evaluate her manners and breeding. The performance demands absolute precision. One misplaced word, one unfamiliar custom, one moment of cultural confusion could unravel everything. Amara navigates these dangers with intelligence sharpened by survival, reading social cues with the same attention she once used to anticipate overseers' moods and avoid punishment. Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, wife of Charleston's most prominent banker, becomes both Amara's greatest supporter and most dangerous observer. She takes particular interest in the new Mrs. Thornwood, inviting her to exclusive gatherings, introducing her to the inner circle of Charleston's female aristocracy, and subtly testing her knowledge of European society. During an afternoon tea in November, Mrs. Pritchard mentions a mutual acquaintance supposedly shared with Lady Catherine's family in England. The name means nothing to Amara, but she responds with the perfect combination of recognition and vague familiarity, suggesting the connection while avoiding specific details. The moment passes, but it illustrates the constant threat of exposure that defines every social interaction. William observes these performances with growing respect for Amara's abilities. She not only maintains the deception but excels at it, becoming more convincing as Lady Catherine than the real woman might have been. Her intelligence, hidden for years beneath the forced subservience required of enslaved people, now finds expression in ways that surprise even William. Behind closed doors at Thornwood Hall, they begin implementing changes that would scandalize Charleston society if discovered. William reduces working hours for field slaves, improves food rations, prohibits the use of whips for minor infractions. He justifies these changes to his overseers as efficiency improvements, claiming that healthier workers produce more profitable harvests. The overseers resist, particularly Thomas Garrett, a brutal man who served William's father for 15 years and considers any mercy toward enslaved people as weakness that encourages rebellion. Garrett watches the changes with suspicion, questioning William's judgment, suggesting that his young wife's European sensibilities have corrupted his understanding of plantation management. Amara uses her position to gather information about enslaved families, learning who has children sold away, who suffers from untreated illnesses, who possesses skills that remain unutilized under the current system. She shares this intelligence with William, helping him identify opportunities for subtle improvements that fly beneath the radar of oversight and social scrutiny. By December, evidence of pregnancy emerges. Morning sickness confines Amara to Thornwood Hall for several weeks, providing a socially acceptable reason to avoid the most demanding social obligations. The pregnancy fulfills the will's requirement for an heir, effectively securing William's inheritance beyond challenge. Marcus Thornwood, the cousin whose ambitions now face permanent frustration, arrives from Mississippi for an unannounced visit. He is a hard man shaped by the brutal cotton country, where fortunes rise and fall with each harvest, where violence against enslaved people exceeds even Carolina standards, where political radicalization transforms economic anxieties into calls for Southern independence. Marcus tours the plantation with barely concealed contempt for William's management changes. He questions the reduced working hours, criticizes the improved rations, suggests that such weakness will inspire rebellion throughout the Lowcountry. His eyes hold calculation as he watches Amara, seeing something he cannot quite identify but instinctively distrusting. A dinner party on Christmas Eve brings Charleston's elite to Thornwood Hall. The house displays wealth and refinement calculated to project unassailable legitimacy. Amara, now visibly pregnant, receives congratulations and advice from plantation mistresses whose own relationships with enslaved people include routine violence and sexual exploitation they never acknowledge. During the dinner, conversation turns to politics. The Mexican-American War approaches its conclusion with American victory seemingly inevitable. Discussion focuses on whether the newly acquired territories should permit slavery, a question that will dominate national politics for the next decade and ultimately lead to civil war. Marcus advocates aggressively for slavery's expansion, arguing that the South's economic future depends on acquiring new cotton lands, that Northern opposition represents an existential threat requiring forceful response. William counters with more moderate positions, suggesting that economic diversification might serve Southern interests better than territorial expansion. The debate reveals the fundamental divisions emerging within Southern society itself. Not all plantation owners share Marcus's radicalism, but the extremists increasingly dominate political discourse, pushing the South toward confrontation with the North and internal divisions that will eventually destroy the very system they seek to preserve. After the guests depart, Marcus confronts William privately in the library. He questions William's loyalty to Southern interests, suggests his Northern education and foreign wife have corrupted his judgment, hints that family loyalty might require intervention if William continues down his current path. The threat hangs unspoken but clear. Marcus suspects something, perhaps not the full truth, but enough to sense vulnerability. He departs for Mississippi with promises to return, watching Thornwood Hall disappear behind moss-covered oaks while calculating his next move. May 1848 arrives with humidity that transforms the Lowcountry into an oppressive greenhouse. Amara's pregnancy reaches its final weeks as the nation absorbs news of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which formally ends the Mexican-American War and transfers vast territories to American control, territories that will become the central battleground in the slavery debate. Childbirth in the antebellum South carries significant mortality risk for all women, but particularly for those giving birth in the heat of Carolina summers. William hires Charleston's most respected physician, Dr. Harrison Blackwood, a man whose practice serves only the city's elite families and whose discretion is absolute. Labor begins on May 14th, lasting through a night of intensity that tests Amara's endurance. William remains close by, violating custom that typically excludes husbands from birthing rooms. His presence serves dual purposes, supporting Amara through the ordeal and ensuring that no unexpected revelation emerges during moments when pain might compromise her careful performance. The child arrives near dawn, a boy whose crying announces his presence to the household staff waiting anxiously below. Dr. Blackwood completes his examination, declares both mother and infant healthy, and accepts William's generous payment along with a bonus that ensures his continued discretion regarding any observations made during the delivery. They name the child Jonathan William Thornwood IV, ensuring the continuation of family nomenclature that stretches back to the original land grants establishing the plantation. His birth secures the inheritance absolutely, satisfying every provision of his grandfather's will and eliminating Marcus Thornwood's claim forever. But the child's appearance creates immediate complications. His skin tone registers lighter than typical for newborns but carries undertones that might darken with age, potentially revealing his mixed-race heritage. His features blend William's angular structure with Amara's fuller characteristics in ways that could pass unnoticed or trigger suspicion depending on the observer's attention and preconceptions. Charleston society responds to the birth with appropriate celebration. Families send gifts, cards, and promises of future visits. Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard arrives personally to inspect the child, offering congratulations while studying the infant with eyes that miss nothing. She comments on his coloring, noting that he seems darker than one might expect from English and Carolina parentage, but attributes it to the jaundice common in newborns. The explanation satisfies curiosity for the moment, but William and Amara recognize the ongoing danger. As Jonathan grows, his appearance might increasingly reveal the truth of his parentage, threatening everything they have constructed. Thomas Garrett, the overseer who has questioned William's management decisions for months, also sees the child. His expression registers something between suspicion and certainty, as if pieces of a puzzle finally align in his mind. He says nothing directly, but his demeanor shifts from skeptical resistance to barely concealed contempt. Within the slave quarters, news of the birth spreads through the communication networks that invisibly connect enslaved communities across the Lowcountry. Some recognize Amara from her previous existence, remember her face despite the dramatic transformation in her circumstances. Whispers circulate, dangerous knowledge shared carefully among people who understand the lethal consequences of speaking truths that challenge white authority. An elderly woman named Sarah, who served in Thornwood Hall's kitchen for 40 years, requests a private audience with Amara under the pretext of offering traditional remedies for new mothers. The conversation that follows reveals the complex dynamics emerging within the plantation's enslaved population. Sarah speaks carefully, acknowledging what she suspects without stating it directly. She explains that many enslaved people view Amara's elevation with hope, seeing it as potential leverage for improved conditions. Others view it with suspicion, fearing that discovery will trigger reprisals affecting everyone. Still others feel betrayed, believing Amara has chosen individual elevation over collective struggle. Amara listens, recognizing the impossible position she occupies. She cannot acknowledge the truth without confirming the very suspicions that endanger everything. She cannot deny it convincingly to someone who knows better. She settles for ambiguity, speaking in generalities about hope for better conditions, about gradual improvements, about the complexity of navigating systems designed to destroy rather than uplift. Sarah departs with herbal preparations and unspoken understanding, leaving Amara to contemplate the weight of expectations now resting on her choices. William faces his own pressures. The birth of an heir triggers legal mechanisms transferring full control of the estate from his father's executors to his direct authority. He now possesses absolute power over 14,000 acres, 347 enslaved people, and financial assets valued at $700,000, an enormous fortune by 1848 standards. With this power comes decision-making authority that could meaningfully improve conditions for enslaved people on Thornwood land. He begins drafting plans for gradual manumission, calculating how many people he might legally free each year without triggering South Carolina's restrictions on emancipation, which require freed people to leave the state within 30 days. But the plans immediately encounter practical obstacles. Freeing enslaved people requires posting bonds guaranteeing their good behavior, obtaining approval from county courts controlled by plantation interests, and accepting the departure of freed individuals from South Carolina under compulsion of law. The legal barriers reveal themselves as designed to prevent exactly what William attempts: the systematic dismantling of slavery from within the system itself. What William and Amara discover next will reveal why their attempt to change the system from within was doomed from the start. The forces arrayed against them operate with ruthless efficiency, and the price of their deception is about to escalate beyond anything they imagined. July 1848 brings news that transforms the already tense political atmosphere. Zachary Taylor, a hero of the Mexican-American War and Louisiana slaveholder, emerges as the Whig Party's presidential candidate. His nomination signals the complexity of national politics, where party affiliation sometimes matters less than sectional identity and where the question of slavery's expansion dominates every significant debate. For Charleston's elite, Taylor's candidacy represents hope that Southern interests can be protected through political means rather than the increasingly common threats of secession and disunion. But beneath the public optimism, anxieties intensify about Northern opposition to slavery, about changing economic conditions, about the sustainability of a social system built on foundations that much of the world now condemns. Marcus Thornwood returns from Mississippi in August with a private investigator named Silas Crane, a man who specializes in fraud detection, inheritance disputes, and the kind of discreet inquiries that powerful families require when they suspect deception. Crane's reputation extends throughout the South. He has exposed false heirs, uncovered financial manipulation, and helped wealthy families protect their interests from internal threats. Marcus offers a simple explanation for Crane's presence: routine verification of inheritance claims to satisfy his own family interests and ensure that everything proceeds properly. But the true purpose is obvious. Marcus seeks evidence to challenge William's control of the Thornwood estate, either through legal means if fraud can be proven, or through social destruction if the truth about Amara's identity emerges. Crane begins his investigation methodically, examining marriage documents, interviewing household staff, requesting information about Lady Catherine's background from contacts in England. He moves through Thornwood Hall with polite persistence, asking questions that seem innocuous but probe systematically for inconsistencies. Amara recognizes the threat immediately. Every answer must align perfectly with the documented history of Lady Catherine Ashford. Every detail must match the invented biography she has performed for 10 months. A single contradiction, one misremembered date or location, could unravel everything. The investigation creates tension that permeates the household. Staff members face questioning about the mistress's habits, her interactions, any observations that might suggest irregularity. Most respond with carefully neutral statements, either genuinely seeing nothing suspicious or understanding the danger of too much knowledge. But Thomas Garrett, the overseer who has watched William's changes with mounting hostility, provides information that encourages Crane's suspicions. Garrett describes William's unprecedented management decisions, the improved conditions for enslaved workers, the reduction in physical punishment, the unprecedented influence the new mistress seems to exert over plantation operations. He stops short of direct accusations but creates impressions calculated to deepen Crane's investigation. Crane requests access to Charleston's slave registries, examining documentation of plantation property going back 20 years. He seeks gaps in the records, unexplained absences, evidence of people who disappeared from official documentation around the time of the wedding. The registries, maintained meticulously for tax and property purposes, provide comprehensive records that both organize and perpetuate the institution of slavery. William learns of Crane's registry access through contacts at the courthouse. The danger escalates dramatically. If Crane connects Amara's previous enslavement to Lady Catherine's appearance in Charleston, the fraud becomes provable, not merely suspected. The legal consequences extend beyond inheritance disputes into criminal territory. William could face prosecution for fraud, forgery, and violation of South Carolina's laws against interracial marriage, which carry severe penalties including imprisonment. A confrontation becomes inevitable. William invites Marcus and Crane to dinner at Thornwood Hall, intending to address the investigation directly rather than allowing it to continue unchecked. The meal proceeds with surface civility masking fundamental hostility. Marcus speaks openly about his concerns, suggesting that family loyalty requires verification of inheritance claims, that their grandfather's legacy deserves protection, that unusual circumstances warrant careful examination. His words carry the weight of social authority. In Charleston's hierarchy, family reputation matters more than individual rights, and challenges to legitimacy threaten everyone connected to the disputed claim. William responds with controlled anger, asserting his legal authority, noting that all inheritance requirements have been satisfied, that his marriage stands valid under civil law, that Marcus's investigation represents nothing more than frustrated ambition seeking justification through manufactured suspicion. The conversation escalates as Crane reveals his preliminary findings. He has located correspondence between Lady Catherine and an English relative, letters written in handwriting that might not match subsequent documents supposedly from Mrs. Thornwood. He has identified gaps in the timeline between Lady Catherine's arrival in Charleston and her supposed recovery from cholera, gaps that the official narrative inadequately explains. Amara participates in the confrontation with remarkable composure, directly addressing Crane's concerns, offering explanations for every inconsistency, maintaining her performance even under direct challenge. She produces letters she has carefully practiced copying in Lady Catherine's documented handwriting style, explains the timeline gaps through details about private medical treatment, responds to each probe with confidence that projects innocence rather than desperation. The dinner concludes without resolution. Crane departs promising to continue his investigation, to pursue leads in England through associates there, to examine every document until he either confirms or eliminates his suspicions. Marcus leaves with barely concealed satisfaction, believing that time works in his favor, that prolonged investigation will eventually reveal the truth he senses but cannot yet prove. After they depart, William and Amara face the reality of their situation. The investigation will not end through patience or hope. Crane will continue probing until he uncovers evidence sufficient to challenge the inheritance, or until something stops him. They consider their options with the stark clarity of people facing existential threat. They could flee, abandoning everything for uncertain refuge in the north, where their interracial relationship would still violate law but might find protection among abolitionist communities. They could attempt to bribe or threaten Crane, risking criminal exposure through actions that might be documented and used against them. They could do nothing and hope that Crane's investigation ultimately fails to produce definitive proof. Or they could take a more dangerous path, actively manipulating the investigation's direction, feeding Crane information that confirms Lady Catherine's identity while leading him away from the truth, using the very mechanisms of the slave system against itself. William makes contact with a forger in Charleston's commercial district, a man who produces false documents for various purposes and asks no questions when properly compensated. He commissions papers that will appear to be official English correspondence, letters that confirm Lady Catherine's identity and background, documents designed to satisfy Crane's investigation by providing exactly the evidence he seeks. The forgeries require significant risk. They must be good enough to pass professional scrutiny. They must align with actual English practices and administrative procedures. They must tell a coherent story that eliminates the gaps Crane has identified. But they represent the best chance to end the investigation before it produces discoveries that no explanation can overcome. September 1848 witnesses events that will reshape American politics for decades. The Free Soil Party nominates former President Martin Van Buren on a platform opposing slavery's expansion into territories acquired from Mexico. The party's existence signals the emergence of organized political opposition to slavery's growth, even if it stops short of calling for abolition where the institution already exists. For Southern plantation owners, the Free Soil Party represents nightmare scenarios. They envision a future where political power shifts to the north, where slavery becomes economically isolated, where the institution they consider fundamental to Southern civilization faces systematic dismantling through legislative means. These fears drive increasing radicalization, including the first serious discussions of secession as a response to Northern political opposition. Charleston society absorbs these national tensions while maintaining its own rigid hierarchies and customs. The question of the Thornwood inheritance becomes entangled with larger anxieties about Southern identity and survival. If William's marriage proves fraudulent, it represents not merely individual deception but a broader threat to the social order. It suggests that the boundaries separating white from black, legitimate from illegitimate, can be breached through manipulation rather than maintained through vigilance. Silas Crane receives the forged documents William commissioned, papers purporting to be official correspondence from English relatives confirming Lady Catherine's identity and explaining the gaps in her documented history. The forgeries are excellent work, carefully aged, bearing apparently authentic seals, written in period-appropriate language and style. But Crane is suspicious by profession and thorough by reputation. He arranges for independent verification through contacts in England, a process that will require months of transatlantic communication but promises definitive resolution. He also intensifies his local investigation, interviewing enslaved people on neighboring plantations, seeking anyone who might remember Amara from before her transformation. The second approach produces dangerous results. An enslaved man named Isaiah, who works on the adjacent Whitfield plantation, recognizes Amara during a chance encounter on the road between properties. He says nothing at the time, but later mentions the recognition to other enslaved workers. Word reaches Crane through the informal network of informants he has cultivated, people who provide information in exchange for small payments and the imagined possibility of gaining favor with powerful white men. Crane presents this information to Marcus Thornwood with careful framing. He cannot prove that Amara is the enslaved woman Isaiah remembers. Memory is unreliable, and the social distance between enslaved workers and plantation mistresses makes such recognition questionable. But the allegation provides foundation for more aggressive investigation, including the possibility of forcing Amara to submit to examination by people who knew the enslaved woman before her supposed transformation. Marcus recognizes the opportunity. He begins organizing what amounts to an informal trial, gathering witnesses who might confirm or deny Amara's previous identity, preparing to present evidence that he believes will destroy William's inheritance and elevate his own claim to the Thornwood estate. William learns of these plans through sympathetic contacts in Charleston's legal community. The informal trial represents catastrophic danger. Even if they survive the immediate challenge, the public airing of suspicions will destroy their social position and invite formal legal prosecution that no amount of forged documents can prevent. A desperate strategy emerges. William prepares to transfer significant assets into accounts beyond South Carolina's legal jurisdiction, establishing financial reserves that might sustain them if they need to flee. He begins discreet communications with abolitionist networks operating in Charleston's free black community, seeking information about routes north and resources available to refugees from the South. Simultaneously, Amara takes her own action. She meets secretly with Sarah, the elderly enslaved woman who recognized the truth months earlier. The conversation that follows reveals the complex calculations that enslaved people make regarding their own survival and the possibility of freedom. Sarah explains that Isaiah's recognition of Amara emerged not from chance but from deliberate investigation. Crane has been paying enslaved informants for information about Thornwood Hall, creating incentives for people to manufacture or reveal damaging intelligence. Isaiah might genuinely remember Amara, or he might be producing information calculated to earn payment and potential favor. More importantly, Sarah reveals that enslaved people throughout the Lowcountry have been watching the situation at Thornwood Hall with intense interest. William's management improvements have attracted notice, raising hopes that his control of the plantation might lead to broader changes. But those hopes conflict with the danger that the truth about Amara represents. If she is exposed, the resulting crackdown could affect enslaved people across multiple plantations as white society reasserts control through increased violence and surveillance. Sarah offers a solution born of pragmatic understanding rather than idealistic hope. She can arrange for Isaiah to recant his identification, to claim he was mistaken or that Crane misunderstood his comments. But the price is specific commitments from William, written manumission papers for Sarah and her family, guarantees of improved conditions for Thornwood's enslaved population, and financial support for establishing underground railroad connections that might help others escape slavery's reach. The conversation reveals the transactional reality underlying resistance to slavery. Idealism exists, but survival requires negotiation, compromise, and the ability to leverage rare opportunities for concrete gains. Sarah has no illusions about William's motivations or the limited scope of what he can accomplish, but she recognizes that his vulnerability creates bargaining power that enslaved people rarely possess. Amara agrees to Sarah's terms, understanding that this negotiation represents one of the few moments when enslaved people can extract meaningful concessions from the system that oppresses them. She commits to using her influence over William to ensure he honors the agreement, staking her own credibility within the enslaved community on delivering results. The arrangement works. Isaiah retracts his identification, claiming that distance and poor lighting led to mistaken recognition. Crane loses his most damaging witness, though his suspicions deepen rather than dissipate. He begins planning alternative approaches, including the possibility of forcing Amara to provide testimony under oath about her background, a legal mechanism that could create perjury liability if she maintains her false identity. But Marcus grows impatient with the investigation's pace. He has invested months and significant resources in pursuing what he believes is obvious fraud. The approaching November elections create urgency. Zachary Taylor appears likely to win the presidency, potentially ushering in changes that affect Southern political dynamics. Marcus wants the Thornwood inheritance resolved before larger events make such family disputes seem trivial by comparison. He makes a decision that will force immediate resolution. He files formal legal challenges to William's inheritance, citing fraud, misrepresentation, and violation of his grandfather's intent. The legal action transforms private investigation into public spectacle, requiring court proceedings that will examine every aspect of William's marriage and Amara's identity. The case is scheduled for December 1848, creating a deadline that neither side can avoid. William and Amara face the reality that their deception must either withstand formal legal scrutiny or collapse completely, with consequences that extend far beyond financial loss into criminal liability and physical danger. December 1848 arrives with unusual cold, transforming Charleston's subtropical climate into something harder and less forgiving. The trial of Thornwood versus Thornwood begins on December 11th in the Charleston County Courthouse, a Greek revival building that symbolizes the legal authority undergirding Southern society. The courtroom fills with spectators drawn by the scandal's combination of wealth, family conflict, and hints of deeper irregularities. Charleston's elite attend in substantial numbers, viewing the proceedings as entertainment and social event as much as legal dispute. The case has been discussed in drawing rooms and at dinner parties for weeks, speculation ranging from mundane inheritance squabbles to wild theories about fraud and imposture. Judge Nathaniel Whitmore presides, a 72-year-old plantation owner whose legal philosophy reflects the conservative values of Charleston's aristocracy. He has built his career defending property rights, including vigorous support for slavery as a legitimate institution protected by law and custom. His presence on the bench virtually guarantees that any challenge to established social order will face skeptical reception. Marcus Thornwood's attorney, Benjamin Crawford, opens with aggressive accusations. He alleges that William has perpetrated fraud against his family, his inheritance, and Charleston society by presenting a false bride whose identity cannot withstand scrutiny. Crawford promises to present evidence demonstrating that the woman calling herself Lady Catherine Thornwood is not who she claims, that her marriage to William is invalid, and that the inheritance should therefore transfer to Marcus as the rightful heir. William's attorney, Richard Pemberton, responds with assertions of legitimacy backed by documentation. He presents marriage certificates, testimony from the reverend who performed the ceremony, statements from Dr. Blackwood about the birth of Jonathan Thornwood IV, and the forged English documents purporting to confirm Lady Catherine's background. He portrays Marcus's challenge as nothing more than disappointed greed, the actions of a man willing to destroy his cousin's reputation to claim wealth he never earned. The first day of testimony focuses on documentary evidence. Crawford challenges the authenticity of papers confirming Lady Catherine's identity, noting the convenient timing of certain documents and the difficulty of verifying English records from across the Atlantic. Pemberton counters with expert testimony from a documents examiner who attests to the paper's legitimacy, pointing out appropriate seals, correct administrative procedures, and proper dating consistent with English government practices. The second day brings witness testimony. Crawford calls Thomas Garrett, the Thornwood overseer who has observed the changes in plantation management and the unusual influence Amara exerts over William's decisions. Garrett stops short of direct accusations but creates impressions of irregularity, describing behaviors that seem inconsistent with typical plantation mistress roles. Under cross-examination, Pemberton systematically destroys Garrett's credibility. He reveals that Garrett has financial motivations for opposing William. Several times over the past year, William disciplined Garrett for excessive violence against enslaved workers, resulting in reduced bonuses and diminished authority. Garrett's testimony emerges as motivated by personal grievance rather than reliable observation. Crawford then attempts to call enslaved witnesses, seeking testimony from people who might have known Amara before her transformation. This creates immediate legal complications. South Carolina law severely restricts enslaved people's testimony, particularly in cases involving white parties. Judge Whitmore rules that such testimony is inadmissible except in extraordinary circumstances, effectively eliminating Crawford's most potentially damaging evidence. The ruling protects William and Amara but reveals the fundamental contradiction in their situation. The same legal structures that oppress enslaved people also shield them from certain types of investigation. The system's internal logic prohibits recognizing enslaved testimony precisely because doing so would grant humanity and credibility to people the law defines as property rather than persons. On the third day, Crawford takes a different approach. He calls witnesses who knew the real Lady Catherine Ashford during her brief time in Charleston before her death. A boarding house owner describes Lady Catherine's appearance, noting details about her height, hair color, and facial features. Crawford then asks whether these descriptions match the woman currently sitting in the courtroom as Mrs. Thornwood. The testimony creates uncomfortable moments. The witness struggles to reconcile her memories with what she sees before her, noting similarities but also differences that might result from changed circumstances, improved health, or simply the unreliability of casual observation. The ambiguity prevents definitive conclusions but plants doubt in the courtroom observers' minds. Pemberton counters by calling Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, Charleston's social arbiter whose endorsement of Amara has been crucial to her acceptance. Mrs. Pritchard testifies with absolute conviction about Mrs. Thornwood's legitimacy, describing months of social interactions, conversations about English society, and demonstrations of knowledge and manners consistent with Lady Catherine's supposed background. The testimony is particularly powerful because Mrs. Pritchard has no obvious motivation to support fraud. Her reputation depends on accurately assessing social authenticity. Her endorsement provides social proof more convincing than any document. On the fourth day, Crawford makes his final, most aggressive move. He demands that Amara testify under oath about her identity and background. The request is unusual. Married women of elite status rarely testified in civil proceedings, but Judge Whitmore allows it, recognizing that the case's unusual circumstances warrant extraordinary measures. Amara takes the witness stand aware that her next words will determine everything. Crawford questions her methodically about her childhood, her family, her education, testing whether her knowledge matches Lady Catherine's documented history. She responds with careful precision, having memorized every detail of the fabricated biography and prepared for exactly this interrogation. Crawford probes for inconsistencies, asking about specific English locations, social customs, family connections. Amara handles each question with confidence born of intensive preparation and inherent intelligence. She provides details that satisfy curiosity without creating new vulnerabilities, maintains composure under pressure designed to break her performance. Then Crawford asks the direct question, "Mrs. Thornwood, before your marriage, were you ever property of the Thornwood plantation or any other establishment in South Carolina?" The courtroom holds collective breath. The question is explosive, violating social norms that prohibit such direct challenges to white women's status. But it addresses the fundamental allegation underlying the entire case. Amara's response comes with controlled indignation. She denounces the question as offensive, insulting, and representative of Marcus Thornwood's desperation to destroy what he cannot possess. She maintains her denial with force that projects truth rather than defensive fabrication. Judge Whitmore intervenes, suggesting that Crawford's question exceeds appropriate bounds. The intervention signals the judge's inclinations. He views the challenge to Amara's identity as threatening to social order, as the kind of accusation that, if validated, would suggest that the boundaries separating white from black can be breached and that elite society cannot reliably identify its own members. Crawford has no more evidence. He has presented every piece of information Crane's investigation produced, called every witness who might support his case, and challenged every aspect of William's narrative. But he cannot prove the fraud he knows exists because the system itself protects the deception he seeks to expose. The trial concludes after 5 days. Judge Whitmore takes the case under advisement, promising a decision within 2 weeks. Judge Whitmore's decision arrives on December 28, 1848. He rules in favor of William Thornwood, finding insufficient evidence of fraud. The marriage stands valid under law, the inheritance remains secure, and Jonathan Thornwood IV is recognized as legitimate heir. Marcus's challenge is dismissed with prejudice. The decision reflects not conviction about evidence but rather the implications of ruling otherwise. Accepting Marcus's challenge would suggest that Charleston society cannot police its own boundaries, that racial categories defining Southern social order are less certain than they appear. Judge Whitmore chooses social stability over truth, recognizing that some revelations threaten the foundation of the system he exists to protect. Marcus Thornwood departs Charleston in fury, returning to Mississippi with his political ambitions destroyed. His humiliation will fuel years of radical secession advocacy, transforming personal grievance into ideological conviction. William and Amara have won legally, but suspicions persist throughout Charleston society. Invitations decrease, conversations grow guarded, easy acceptance transforms into polite distance. They remain part of society but occupy ambiguous positions where legitimacy stands legally confirmed but socially questioned. William continues implementing changes at Thornwood Hall, honoring commitments to Sarah and other enslaved people. He manumits several families, provides Underground Railroad support, and maintains improved conditions. But South Carolina law requires freed people to leave the state within 30 days, effectively exiling them as the price of liberty. Every reform meets resistance from legal structures designed to prevent exactly what he attempts. By 1850, Amara bears 2 more children, further cementing the Thornwood line but making exposure increasingly catastrophic. She lives in constant performance, never able to reveal her authentic self. She participates in Charleston society while hearing white women discuss enslaved people as property, performing agreement with ideas that deny her own humanity. The psychological cost proves immense. The title, The Inheritance That Sank America, refers not to financial consequences but to moral foundations. Their deception succeeded because American society in 1847 could not acknowledge what it meant if they succeeded. Admitting that an enslaved woman could successfully impersonate white aristocracy would require acknowledging that racial categories are social constructions rather than biological realities, that slavery rests on fictions maintained through violence rather than truths confirmed by nature. Judge Whitmore's decision to uphold the marriage represents choosing to preserve those fictions rather than confront their fragility. The system chose stability over truth, demonstrating that the antebellum South would sacrifice honesty, justice, and moral coherence to maintain slavery. This choice, multiplied across thousands of similar decisions, led directly to 1860's crisis. The South's increasing radicalization, unwillingness to accept any limitation on slavery's expansion, and eventual secession choice, all emerged from the same fundamental dishonesty that allowed William and Amara's fraud to succeed. Their story reveals that the antebellum South existed in collective bad faith, maintaining beliefs everyone suspected were false because the alternative meant confronting the inhumanity of their entire system. That bad faith made civil war inevitable, because societies built on lies eventually face moments when reality can no longer be denied. William Thornwood died in 1872, surviving the Civil War that destroyed the world his inheritance represented. Amara lived until 1881, witnessing emancipation and Reconstruction, seeing slavery's formal end but also new systems of racial oppression that preserved old hierarchies under new names.